documented. So this is still from Slate, so every detail of the children's interactions gets micromanaged by concerned adults. Now, few would deny that we should expose children to all sorts of toys and play activities. But what it seems to me what the Swedes are doing is they're not just encouraging children to try new things, they are requiring it. And not just any new thing, the things they want them to play with. Now today, most experts encourage tolerance and understanding and acceptance of gender variant kids, the kids who want to be like the opposite sex. If you have a little girl who only wants to play like a boy, wants to dress like a boy, or you have a male child that wants to behave like a girl. This is, in the old days, and probably still in many places, these children were subject to horrific invasive therapies, and now they're saying, kind of leave them alone and support them. Apparently your gender identity is so powerful that even against all of this pushback, a boy who feels he is a girl will insist. And the feeling now among the experts is tolerant understanding. And that's what that's freedom feminism. Tolerant understanding for children, for adults, for what we become, and to stipulate under conditions of freedom and when we're fully informed. Now, it's still a feminism because I still think there's a vast scope for encouraging. I'm still very happy when women break through, and I want to see more female laureates, Nobel laureates, and CEOs of Fortune 500s, or bullfighters. Oh, not bullfighters, oh my God, it's so cruel. Race car drivers. I just want to see, I think we have to be vigilant about protecting the principle of mutual respect, mutual tolerance. That, as I noted, unlike today's organized women's movement, I don't insist on equality of outcomes. In fact, equality of outcomes could be a sign of social dysfunction. Now, so far, I've tried to justify a core principle of freedom feminism, that the sexes taken as a group are different but equal. But freedom feminism affirms a second principle that distinguishes it from other schools of feminism. And I will put it this way: truth is on the side of compassion, and falsehood is no threat. And I'm talking about truth. Earlier in the introduction, it was mentioned that I have a weekly video blog called The Factual Feminist, and each week I take on a feminist myth, and there are lots of them. And some of them have been repeated so often they're beyond the reach of rational analysis. And you can't take the wage gap. How many times have you heard, for the same work, a woman earns 77 cents for every dollar a man earns? But even feminist economists know that that is just the raw data on all men and women working full time. You have to control for college major. You have to control for profession. You have to control for how many years were they in the workplace. Did they take a long time out of the workplace? I have a sister-in-law who teaches math at Brooklyn College, but she, and I'm sure she earns a lot less than her male colleagues, but Claire took about 20 years out of teaching to raise 5 children. So she does not earn the same. Now, you can't always say, oh, that's a wage gap. You have to do the controls. What we need to know is what is the adjusted gap, what is the difference, and when you do the proper controls, the wage gap narrows to the point of vanishing. There's still a few cents that can't be accounted for, and it could be discrimination. We have to be open to that. It could be something else. But I say that truth is on the side of compassion, good social policy, it's on a good social policy. If we are going to have a women's movement that so insists that it's always discrimination, and they're insisting on, relieving sometimes the worst things about male, it's all because of discriminatory male employees. It isn't. There are a lot of other explanations. It's possible, but let's slow down and be reasonable. Now, I don't want to overstate this, but in my career, I have looked at feminist studies and data on women and depression, or women and eating disorders, or women and and violence, women in the workplace, women in education. It's almost always spin or misinformation, or sometimes just confused, outright untruths. Now, I'm not saying people lie. I don't think people are like that. I think they believe their own worldview, and they seek to confirm it. And so there are all these statistics floating around about how oppressed women are because we aren't, these gender gaps and so forth, without a real effort to understand them. And so I think we'd all be better off if we made this effort to get good numbers and to have social policy and our laws based on reality. And it's a huge problem right now because there's been about 20 years of gender scholarship. It's just not trustworthy. Now think about it. In most fields, people cancel out each other's biases. So if you're doing research in medicine or you're doing research in biology or something, it doesn't matter what your politics are. It does matter what your politics are in gender studies. It tends to be a one-party system. And people really look for data to confirm. Again, it's that confirmation bias. So I think that the second thing for freedom feminism is evidence-based policies for women and men. And it might turn out there are areas where it's actually men that need help. And I wrote a book about boys because boys have fallen so far behind in education. And our colleges are now 57% women. And I saw a study the other day that just shocked me. This law professor at the University of Michigan found that when men and women are commit a crime, and they have a similar history, and she tried to do all the controls, so you had two very similarly placed people. The men are much more likely to go to jail, and they get far longer sentences. The best thing, if you commit a crime, the best thing in your favor is your gender, to be a female. Now, the author, she's not suggesting we have harsher sentences for men. She says we should look at the fact that we've got over 2 million people in prison in this country, mostly men, largely a male population, in incarceration nation. And so that would be a gender issue. That's a social catastrophe, what's going on in our prison, and it's largely males who are suffering. But final thing I'll say about this, and then I'm going to end and open this up for question. A third principle in freedom feminism is that we're all in this together, is that if women are in trouble, men tend to be in trouble. If men are in trouble, women are in trouble. These are our, if you're a woman and boys are not getting educated, that's your little brother, or that could be your boyfriend or your husband or your son. And it's the same for men. I think that but as a freedom feminist, I would always emphasize the mutuality, the complementarity, and how much we depend on each other and need each other. And it's not as if it's two warring tribes or two warring teams, and Venus and Mars, and we've all got to root for Venus, and the hell with Mars. No, it's a single. Whatever the trophy is, we're fighting together, and it's at our peril that we separate and along the lines of gender, and to do that. So I think that a reality-based, male and female respecting feminism could greatly help women in the United States and throughout the world. Freedom feminism is my humble contribution to that effort, and I want to thank my friends and buddies for listening to me. The ovular is now over. I will take questions. Yes?
Okay, so I think I had a question going back to kind of like the Swedish school system you brought up. So even if we assume that some are born as just boys or as girls as just girls, which I don't think is a controversial assumption, but if we make that assumption, how should we socialize our children in reaffirming those biological biases?
What I think is that you want to open up your child to complexity and to be interested in life, and that means that with a little boy, the big challenge is to get little boys to settle down and read. It's a huge challenge. With girls, it's sometimes a challenge to get them interested in math and science. We've had, and we've done a very good job, at least in our, certainly in our high schools and elementary schools, trying to get girls more interested and require them to take more classes. So I think that you do what is necessary, and in this society it's necessary to get an education, and you have to be literate, and so we have to do that. But then when it's what they enjoy, when they're having fun, and your little daughter goes through a princess stage, I'm a kind of feminist, I agree with this wonderful teacher, Vivian Guston Paley. She wrote a book a long time ago about, and she was a kindergarten teacher, and she respected the differences between the boys and girls in her classes. She knew there was no way to break down the stereotype. And she just enjoyed it, and she said, some people said, well, wait a minute, the boys have their superheroes, and they're the heroes, and why can't we encourage that with girls? And she said, well, come to my class and watch girls play house, or play princess. Princesses and mothers can be very powerful. And she said, girls have their own fantasies of power, and they're just different. And so I think that there's even some sexism in the feminist critique of princess culture. If you watch carefully what girls are doing, they're happy, they're thriving, and as long as you make sure everything else is, they have to do what they're doing. Again, I'm not saying, you have to sort of follow what the child wants. And that's why I do have far more respect, and have learned a lot from people, children who defy the stereotype, who are a girl who is male identified, or a boy who is, read their accounts, and then try to change them. It doesn't work. And I think there's just a limit.
I guess a quick follow-up then. Wouldn't we be able to do both if we have kind of that Swedish style system where the education isn't necessarily promoting or demoting the gender, but also allow them to have their play, but also not victimizing that particular play? Like, isn't that kind of, that wouldn't be mutually exclusive?
No, but right now, if you look into some of the women's groups or the activist groups, there are lots of efforts. There's some commercials like Goldilocks, and they're trying to, Goldilocks, I guess they call them. They're trying to get girls to play like boys, and that's fine. But then but they kind of denigrate the way girls play. So in these commercials, they're fun, and I like to see the girls doing whatever it is they want them to do. But then they're making fun of the way girls play, and I don't see the point of that. In fact, I think it's disrespectful of who the child is. So it's simply, there's just a lot of parents that I worry a lot about little boys, and I'll tell you why this has consequences. Is the typical, I don't know the exact ages, but there's a period where maybe they never outgrow it, but little boys, preschool, kindergarten, there's a lot of superhero play. And the boys sort of cast themselves as heroes. And they like to vanquish bad guys, and they're going out, and in our schools today, these boys will often be punished because they might be, there was a little boy, I think it was in Colorado, it was in the newspaper, there's several stories about, you read them regularly, a little boy suspended. Well, he threw a grenade to kill bad guys in his fantasy. Now, this disturbs me because play is the basis of learning. And if the way your child plays, if you shame them, you shame a little girl because she wants to play dress up, or a little boy, that's just cutting out learning. And then the interaction with the adult. But these two professors at University of Maine studied teachers' interactions with boys and girls and found that the teachers were very supportive of girls and would go and talk to them and encourage to play. And the boys were often, they called it redirected, the boys were redirected all day long. And it's almost as if contemporary teachers are just not comfortable with young, they almost, that they view youthful masculinity as a pathology. And think that so the girls are becoming like the gold standard. So that's what I'm talking about, is that kind of tolerance for children. And then in adults, it's a different kind of tolerance. Yes?
Going back to the wage gap, can you give a comment on the controls that were given? Because I'm just wondering how much might be the choice of the women and how much might be the situation that leads to the wage gap. Like if they had a hard time getting back into the workforce even though they wanted to or something like that.
Right. Two things about that. First, the second thing about getting back. Like, as a freedom feminist, I acknowledge that the big issue is women who take time out for their families, because that's like 60% of women really want that. So I say, okay, let's build a society where women can do that, or make it more possible. But then there's going to pay a huge price if you go away from your job. Not all jobs, but a high-level job. And you come back, you're just never going to. It's very hard to make it to the top. And that probably can't be eliminated, but we could make it easier, and we could make have just workplaces that are friendlier to those choices. But the controls about the workplace is that it just turns out men work more hours per week. When they calculate the wage gap, they take everybody who works full-time, and full-time counts anything over 35. But then far more men than women work 45. If you look at doctors, people say, oh no, you're wrong, even within professions men earn more. Even if men are nurses, they earn more. Well, but nurses have specialties. They're males, they come in, they say, what pays the most? Anesthesiology. And the men go into nurse anesthesiology. I was giving a lecture at the University of Pittsburgh, and there was a nurse, a guy, and he told me that he was working at a hospital, and another hospital opened across town, and they came to hire people, and they were going to pay them more. And the men said, great, and went. And the women said, I have my friends here, I'm connected, I don't know, and they stayed. Now, what is that? Now, to me, that's the freedom feminism. I'm thinking back to Hannah More and Frances Willard, and that women and men are somewhat different. We need both. They're different. We make different calculations, taken as a group. I'm sure there's some women that would dart over and take that job. But if you look at women in medicine, male doctors make more, but male doctors are more likely to be cardiac surgeons. And what do women do? A huge proportion of women doctors are in pediatrics and family medicine and do not go into the high-paying specialties. Now, is that, I met women doctors, they're very informed, and they made a choice, they made a life decision. And they pay a price for that, but I think men pay a price for their choices too. But we don't have right now we don't have a gender equity movement that really listens, I think, to the point of view of men. I want to listen to both, and then do what find policies and practices that are best for both. Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're talking about the gender gap. I was under the impression that the comparison was made for women that were working the same job for the same amount of time. So wouldn't that exclude the fact that some males take higher paying jobs because we're comparing only at the same position?
I haven't seen any study that compares men and women in the same job with the same education. We started with the same, that you would have a lawsuit if you did that. We have a law against that. And the thing is that they make it seem like they're doing that. And the AAUW, the American Association of University Women, they say, oh, we found a gender gap, even after we looked at men and women just a year out of the workplace in the same field. But then you find that they define field in a very funny way. And so for example, they said working in the social sciences, and they counted people who had degrees in economics the same as people who had in sociology. But you don't earn the same if you major in sociology as you do in economics. You make more. Economics is, you just make more. And now, maybe young women don't know that. I think they do. But if they don't, then every college must tell you. But if someone had come to me, a philosophy major, and said, look, this is crazy. Average pay for philosophers, forget it. Nobody even hires them. It's not practical. Here's a textbook on petroleum engineering, and that is the future. I wouldn't want to do that, and I understood it, and I just assumed that young women today are not that different from the way I was. So you have to do those careful controls. When you do it, and here's another one, men do appear. I don't have absolute evidence on this, but enough people have repeated it from both sides of the argument that I presume there's good evidence for it, that men are better at demanding raises and higher salaries. So that, you have to factor that in. Again, it's not the employers, it's something in society, and it's something that may not be bad. There may be an innocent reason for it, and it may be that we are equal but different, and we have to look at the life satisfaction of that nurse who stayed with her friends versus the guy who went. And maybe they both have the same level. Maybe they were doing what they wanted to do. Yes?
So you mentioned that, you know, you've got these feminism myths and a lot of them that you've debunked, more or less. So what do you think then are some of the biggest issues that feminism needs to encounter, and especially freedom feminism?
Well, as I said, the biggest issue I wish that we had on our campuses, I dearly wish that there's something that I saw in the 1980s on campus. There was a lot of focus on a huge human rights crisis in South Africa, which was dismantling apartheid. And the activists on the campus were focused out into the world on this horrible injustice. We live in a world where there are countries with gender equality, and where women are horribly treated, and often when women are horribly treated, so are the men, who, at least the ones who aren't the elites, but we have to look into that too. But I would say, I wish that we had chapters on the campus in our women's centers. We're making all contacts with their counterparts in Egypt, their counterparts in Saudi Arabia, their counterparts in Iran. I wish everyone was studying. It's kind of like 1984 for many women in Iran. I mean, not the year, the novel. And The Handmaid's Tale, people read that book. But it's not about the United States, but it's about some parts of the world are very close to the Margaret Atwood novel, The dystopian Handmaid's Tale. So that would be the first thing. I would love to see, instead of like, I mean, campuses, these elite campuses back east, like Swarthmore and Wesleyan, all the women are like obsessed with their own oppression and how they are victims of this culture, and they're, I mean, it's insane because they're very privileged. And I mean, they may have personal psychological traumas, but any individual can have that. But they are organized around their own, and so they're really not open. It doesn't seem to me that they are open. So that's number one. And number two, I think a lot of the suffering and misery in our society is the destabilization, the dysfunctional family, the breaking up of families. It just takes a terrible toll on children, and it's implicated in the feminization of poverty, the problem of fatherlessness. And I think that conservatives and liberals have to work together. There are some think tanks. There's one that started in Washington that I love called The Third Way, and they brought together, and they looked at the broken family, and they wanted to get the best liberal thinking and the best conservative thinking. And they've come out with fantastic studies. And so I want to see more of that. Some more. So I want real outreach to more moderate women to come to the table, to feel that a safe place was the women's center, even if you were, you could be conservative, that could be a place for you in the women's movement. And now conservative women are just one of many groups of women who are crossed off the list and have no voice. And it's almost as if what happened, they had this feminist revolution, and then in scholarship, men wrote the history, women's history, and men wrote about women's psychology, and men wrote about, the Middle Ages. It was male historians. Now women are going to write it. And I thought, yeah, okay, no, we got hardline feminists writing it from there, an even more narrow point of view than would have been, than the men did in some cases. So that's not progress to me. That's why I'm thinking feminism, just for whatever complicated reason that some sociologists will work out, it went off in a wrong direction. I saw it happening, and now, my God, it seems to me to be allowed to control. So I would try to reform that and do the two things I said. Yes?
So you just mentioned an elite college on the East Coast. Do you have any comments on Sweetbriar College that just announced that it's going to be closing at the end of this academic year? And might this somehow be tied to some of the issues that you've been alluding to?
What was their problem? They couldn't get any men. Was it a women's college?
Yes.
Well,
In Virginia. I don't know if that
I just
any
read that it
difference.
closed, like yesterday, it was in the news.
Yeah, they decided, the Board of Trustees on the 28th of February decided to close the college, but the announcement was sort of formally made yesterday. And I'm just curious if, you know, it's symptomatic of maybe some of the other issues that you.
Well, I think, you know, I do think there's got to be a lot of reform in colleges, but the Sweetbriar may have met the fate of just, you know, what happened, the women didn't want to go there, and a lot of our colleges, not this college, I looked at your statistics and you have, I think it's because you're this big school of engineering. If you want guys in your college, start a school of engineering. There are two ways. If you want to get men for your school, a football team or a school of engineering. And even if the guys can't play football, they just sit on the bench, they'll come. They will come, they will pay full tuition. And this has been documented and schools have tried it. But what's happening in some liberal arts colleges are the men are disappearing. And so, and there's a tipping point. Apparently, if it goes past 62%, becomes 63 or pretty, then the women don't want to be there. So you have the men don't mind, by the way. They go to a school that's 70% female. They don't complain. They don't protest. They're happy. The men are not going to solve the problem of men in education. They're just not. It's probably going to be mothers and concerned women again that address this problem. But I think these colleges are at risk, and they're in a bind because if you want, let's say, like Howard University in Washington D.C. Historical black college, but it has a high percentage. I think it's 63, approaching 65% female. But then they got a Title IX investigation because Washington says you've got to allocate your sports resources according to proportionality. So you should have 63% of your athletes be women. So they had to cut their male baseball team and wrestling team and lose more guys. And so this is a perverse outcome of not acknowledging difference. And if you could get a lot of guys to come, you know, engineering school or more teams, you know, and this is true for males everywhere. But we're not allowed to acknowledge that, so we push these policies. And what I really think is behind it, oh, I'm getting away from your question, but I'll come to it, is that we did need a women's revolution. We needed the second wave of feminism, and it was successful. It's one of the great American success stories, and we built this empire of women's organizations. They are everywhere, all over Washington, all over every state, every municipality, women's groups, and now there are innumerable, you know, hashtags and groups, women, and men. There's this organizational imbalance. There's almost nothing. I mean, if men do organize, people say, it's MRAs. Men, you know, it's misogyny. And there's a group organizing around men's health. They tried to have a convention or something, and it was Toronto, and women's groups came and were screaming. It was a terrible thing to see. So this is a big problem because men do have troubles, and they're in education especially. Health is a whole other area. Our health institutions exist. There are many men that just live totally outside and they do not interact with doctors until they have their first heart attack or something. They just aren't there. So there's a lot to be done. But anyway, get back to your question. With Sweetbriar, I don't know the details, but I do know a lot of colleges are desperate to get males before they go broke because no women want to go there if they're not going to ever have a date in the school. You know, it's all, I think it was a dean at the College of William and Mary who said, well, we're not Mary and Mary, we're William and Mary, and so I will tell you, these colleges now practice a kind of affirmative action for males. It is easier for a male to get in college. And it's too bad, in a way, that we have to do that. Yes?
As far as workplace disparity, I was just wondering what your opinions are when there's clearly like wage disparities, say even in like Hollywood, where recently it was revealed that stars like Amy Adams are still being paid far less than their male co-stars. And again, within the entertainment industry, they just released a report that found that the number of female writers and executives and producers is actually going down and not increasing, even though there is an overwhelming number of women that do want to enter that field.
Yeah, I guess as I said, I've always I want to hear, because sometimes you do find, I've heard enough people that work in finance that I think there's probably, Wall Street and I think there's probably a huge problem for women there. But in Hollywood, I would want to know something. For example, Amy Adams, I don't know who, a male, take any comparable male movie star. What if it's the case that if you have a movie and you cast this male star, it just makes vastly more money. And what if shouldn't that matter?
It was in the same movie. It was Bradley Cooper and Amy Adams, and they were both in, I can't remember the name of the movie, but they were in a movie together, and he made far more than she did.
Okay, then I'd want to know, what were his options? What did he turn down? You just want to know, you just have to know the background. And it may also be, maybe she didn't ask for more. I mean, this is something women have to be told to say, no, I want more. Maybe she didn't do that.
Well, also, a lot of these contracts tend to be negotiated with agents, which means that there's going to be someone advocating. It's not her necessarily making the personal decision. And still, with all of this sort of infrastructure, she's still not getting an equitable. And why is the studio not trying to pay their actors equitably, especially because it's not like he's some big star and she's not someone. I mean, she at the point, she'd already been nominated for Oscar at least, I know, once or twice.
Yeah.
So there's no reason that she should be deserving of the equal kind of respect and pay grade as him.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. But again, if somebody should look into it, write about it and see, and it could turn out that it is just a legacy of sexism. And people just think actresses aren't worth as much. And but I do know that blockbuster movies with male superstars, those kinds of movies, I mean, think about that movie, they don't make the kind of money is like it used to be like Bruce Willis or one of these action macho movies who make, I mean, there's just the reality of the marketplace that you'll make a lot more of that. So you've got to put it all in there, but again, I'm open to the possibility that there's some shenanigans and women, and I think if the women are aware of it and they organize and their agents are on top of it, they can address it. Yes?
So, quick question about your first tenet of freedom feminism. You say that we should reject gender roles so that way individuals could be free to express themselves in whatever way they truly enjoy the most. But should we add the caveat that people should be free to do what they want, provided it doesn't hurt other people in the process?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I thought that myself, oh God, I'm just sounding like some complete libertine, like whatever weird thing you want to do. No. And I also think people criticize me for my book on boys and oh, she's just saying boys should be boys. No, you have to civilize a little boy. A young man, I mean, masculinity without morality is, boys who are insufficiently socialized have very unpleasant ways of getting noticed. And every society invests a lot into calming down or directing the aggression and risk-taking and so forth of a little boy. You direct it to good ends. You have to do that. So, but I'm always concerned as an ethics teacher and Aristotelian for good ends. And so I think character education and sports for boys with a coach and role models and learning, all of that is so important. And you have to open up a boy's heart and make him compassionate. And you have to do this with girls too, but it's sometimes a different undertaking. So, but yeah, I'm not that libertarian to say just let everybody do whatever they want. You have to do whatever you want consistent with the well-being of others. Yes?
Just going back, staying on topic with the wage gap, I know it's kind of a hot topic tonight, but I'm curious, even using your own controls that you were speaking of as far as making it so that you're accounting for the fact that women typically are in different careers than men are and that they take time off to be mothers or take care of family, whatever it is. I'm just wondering, what does it say about our society if the careers that women tend to be in, the nurturing careers, are paid so much less than men are? Or the careers that men typically are in. And I'm just wondering, why is there such an imbalance there that women tend to be in careers that are paid so much less?
Well, I was once in a debate with a feminist from another think tank in Washington, and she pointed out that zookeepers, who are mostly men apparently, get paid more than childcare workers. And this was outrageous. And I just thought about that and I said to her, but wait a minute, the fact is, it's hard to be like, it takes a special skill set to give a giraffe a bath or whatever you have to do. A lot of women can take care of babies. And the thing is, you don't have to even, it doesn't take, obviously, there's so many people that are able and want to do it. And whereas it's taking care of animals in a zoo, it's harder to get people to do it, and they need training. So you have to account for how much training. And if you look at the market. Now, people have, I think that it's probably true, there's a legacy here of just underpaying people that offer care, but what do? One suggestion was comparable worth, and that means you sort of have the government set rules about what wages can be, try to raise the wages. And wherever it's been tried, it's just some kind of a mess. And it ends up with, it just drives prices up and leads to unemployment and things. I mean, there's no easy way to set wages outside of the market. So, I don't know, I mean, we could try, I'm open to it. I want to hear from economists what it's going to do to the economy of California, let's say, if we insist that people that work in daycares are as much as auto mechanics or something. Maybe they are, but I don't think so. And if they are, it takes technical training to do a lot of the things. The other thing you should know about men's jobs, men are vastly overrepresented in the deaf professions. Jobs that have a high rate of injury, loggers, oil riggers, shrimp, lobster, shrimp fishermen in New England, huge rates of injury, and you find far more men. So I would want that to be mentioned too, the risk gap. Yes?
As far as people